And we're live. Hello. Hello, everybody out there in YouTube land. Thanks very much for joining me. We're just getting going tonight. Sorry for a few seconds late there. Just trying to get ourselves organized. Hope you're all keeping well. And welcome back to the station for our chapter two of our Frank Herbert's Dune Book Club. I've been sitting annotating away, working away at this chapter this week, and quite looking forward to it. So if anybody's out there, say hello, and hopefully you can all hear me okay. And I guess we'll have a wee look. So, just a wee bit of a recap on what we were doing last week. Excuse me. Well, as I said, basically just retouch. We had a good look at chapter one, which is, and I think, pretty much in depth as we get to meet some of our protagonists in the story. We get to meet the Reverend Mother, Jessica, and of course Paul Muad'Dib, and we get into just how the book works. So that it begins. Each chapter begins with an epigraph, and they're all written by Princess Irulan. So there's Joseph saying, "Here you fine." Hi, Joseph. Chaya saying, "Shalom, y'all." And Brad Rose saying, "Good morning, Doc. Sound is good. Thanks very much, guys, and thank you very much for joining me." Joseph saying, "I'll only be here for a little bit before I have to go to work." No worries, Joseph. And as I said, folks, whenever the videos go up, we'll put them up and put them into the Dune Book Club playlist on the station. And as I went and checked the first couple there, and they had about 100 adverts in them. So usually after about a day, I'll strip them out and leave about 5 or 6 in to hopefully make it a bit more palatable. Though I've no idea how to get the right balance with that thing on YouTube. It's quite strange. So excuse me. So thank you very much for joining us. There's Cynthia saying hello. I hope you're all keeping well, folks, no matter where you are. And I suppose we're right in the GMT meridian, aren't we? So we've people in different times around the world and stuff. So hopefully we think the 9 p.m. sort of thing is a kind of good balance in that. Just for people on either side of us, time zone wise, you know. So we had a good few wee comments from everybody there last time. We had some people making. We were talking about the common mythologies, I suppose, that we can find in Dune. And already we've had people talking about things like similarities between the Reverend Mother and, say, for example, Baba Yaga. Someone mentioned they could see shades of the Mabinogion in this in Dune, you know. So I think it's quite interesting. As we go forward, we'll see lots and lots of wee developments and nods to different myths and different languages, different cultures, all of this kind of thing. So it's really good. So chapter two, I suppose we should better get at it. And as I said, folks, as we're going through, if you have any comments, feel free to chirp in, and I'll try and catch up. I have the thing set to live chat. Excuse me. And as usual, I'll try and get the fluids in to keep the coughing down. So chapter two begins with another epigraph, and I suppose quickly being as I've been going through and annotating this, sometimes I notice wee things and I go back. So the first thing I wanted to point out about our first epigraph in chapter one is really that they're to do with lessons, that it's to do with teaching. And so the first epigraph, in terms of a beginning, is a very delicate time, that one, or is the time for taking the most delicate care that the balances are correct. What we're actually talking about within that is to begin your study of the life of Muad'Dib. And just in looking at the second epigraph, as we begin, goodness, my hearing's a bit funny tonight, folks. I sound as if I'm underwater, but that's my sort of funny hearing problem kicking in. So I'll do my best to carry on anyway, and just assume I'm not shouting at you. Excuse me. So chapter two, as we said, all these chapters begin with an epigraph. And just going on from that, what we were talking about, the study of Muad'Dib. In this one, we're talking about the understanding of Muad'Dib. And we'll just begin at the beginning with chapter two as usual, and we'll read the epigraph. To attempt an understanding of Muad'Dib without understanding his mortal enemies, the Harkonnens, is to attempt seeing truth without knowing. Is to attempt seeing truth without knowing falsehood. Apologies. It is the attempt to see the light without knowing darkness. It cannot be. Excuse me. And as usual, this is one of these little. We get that this is from the Manual of Muad'Dib by the Princess Irulan. So straight off the bat, I suppose this is the chapter that introduces us to the Harkonnens, our antagonists, if you like. it's interesting when we talk about, I suppose, typical structures within a literary story, but the idea of a protagonist and antagonist, the hero and the villain, these are kind of terms that are going to be useful and problematic at the same time for us as we go through the Dune novels. Of course, in terms of how we think of Paul as a hero, how we think of the Baron, etc., as villains, and this epigraph is very important, I think, because we can't understand. I suppose it's understanding the Atreides without understanding the Harkonnens, and we get these pairings within this epigraph. It's truth and falsehood, the light and the dark, etc. Um, and in terms of how these terms are presented, we get it's about seeing and knowing, and in particular the term knowing. Without knowing is repeated, and we talk about these little repetitions that Frank uses within the story to imprint, as he likes to put it, imprint ideas. Of course, we were saying that they're just rhetorical techniques, really. So within this first epigraph, the three key words that we can really glean from it in terms of aura is understanding, seeing, and knowing. And of course, the epigraph ends with "it cannot be." So we can't understand the Atreides without looking at the Harkonnens, and via that we can't understand Paul Muad'Dib without understanding the Harkonnens, and that they are truth to falsehood, the light to the darkness. So they're exact opposites. And oddly enough, when I'm doing my wee notes and stuff here, I've drawn a little wee kind of just a wee moon type thing, that they're light to dark, etc. So our first epigraph gets us going, and I suppose again it's about this mysterious character Muad'Dib, but we're getting that we know that they're the villains from the previous chapter, that the Harkonnens, I think, are their mortal enemies, and we're going to get a good insight into the Harkonnens in this chapter, and we should consider them in terms of these polar opposites. So what we see here now, we should consider that everything we learn about the Harkonnens, that the Atreides and maybe Paul Muad'Dib are kind of the opposite. They should be the polar opposite of these guys. And one other thing to consider, I suppose, in terms of hindsight, if we understand the book already, we understand that Princess Irulan is, I suppose, acting as a historian, a writer, but probably that this is propaganda, and it's probably Atreides propaganda as well. And I suppose we're going to see a few wee things in terms of how something that's quite interesting, I think, in chapter 2, in terms of how the narrator works, and in particular how the narrator does not describe the Baron for us. Excuse me. So let's so the first wee epigraph, as always, there's lots of meaning there, and really that we should, in a sense, also consider that we're looking at some kind of future history. We're getting little passages of books that are written and talking about these events as if they're history, and then we get a snapshot of action and, I suppose, intrigue, action and movement within that story, before we'll get our next historical epigraph, if you like. So right off the bat, we have a few things here. We understand that they're mortal enemies. Pardon me. And I think we get just talking about the name Harkonnen. Excuse me, is meant to be a bit of a loaded term, I suppose, as well. There's a bit of a story about how Frank got this name from a film directory, I believe. But the name is actually Finnish. And I suppose the sound of the word itself is evocative of a certain things. It's almost onomatopoeic, hark, stark. And I think somebody's done a wee bit of work on it. I have got a wee note here that says harka in Finnish from the word bull, which is again an interesting, I suppose, animal association, and denotes strength and has mythological connotations. And I think we have a wee note here that Rautha means iron at some point when we get to looking at Feyd. So the name itself, I suppose, in the nature of the times, this book being written in the late 50s and being published in the early 60s, early to mid 60s, the name could be suggestive and meant to be evocative, I suppose, of the USSR and the Cold War, that kind of thing. So we're going to see how Herbert sets up his main villain here. And as I said, we have these pastings, these pairings. Apologies. So truth, falsehood, light, darkness, Muad'Dib, Harkonnen. These are the three polar opposites that he presents us with. And again, I've got sort of, if you think about darkness, Harkonnen within those words, dark and hard. Again, Herbert likes to play with language quite a bit, as we see. So straight off, rather interestingly, we get this. It was a relief globe of a world, partly in shadows, spinning under the impetus of a fat hand that glittered with rings. So straight off, we get this description of this particular globe, and it's a relief globe of a world, and we'll find out that it's Arrakis. And of course, the globe and the hand, I suppose, that spin it, the individual who is controlling that spin, both will remain mostly in shadows for the bulk of this chapter. Excuse me. So again, we have, if you think about the associations, we've just come from Castle Caladan with Paul Atreides, the hand in the box, the damage to the left hand, and the symbology of the hand. And of course, we'll ultimately find out. We were having a bit of a chat about this the last time. In particular, the Baron here is a fat hand and is bejeweled, is the term that I think he uses, be ringed actually at some point, that Herbert uses. And we're about to get a sense of this individual without saying too much about him. And I suppose that the words here that we have, shadows spinning, and the hand in itself representing, I suppose, control, agency, and it represents other things too. But we'll particularly with the Baron, the use of the word fat, and we'll get to how he's described right at the very end of the chapter. And up until that point, I think really the Baron's mind and voice and presence do a lot of the talking for him. But we'll see again this fat hand is a term that we're going to see repeated a fair bit in relation to it. And it should be in our own mind. As I said, we've come a bit of a contrast to how we've left Paul and his situation with his hand in the previous chapter. So we get a wee bit of information. And interestingly, again, Herbert's framing the chapter here. He's setting up a scene. And so we begin with this globe in this hand. And it's almost as if we pull back. And the next thing, rather than going to, I suppose we get a couple of wee mentions about this globe, and that it's on a free-form stand. It's at one wall of a windowless room, whose other walls present a patchwork of multicolored scrolls, film books, tapes, and reels. So this is some kind of intelligence room or in some kind of library, and it's in contrast to how we see Paul meet the Reverend Mother. And again, if we remember that the Reverend Mother is seated and framed between these windows, although she doesn't look out the view, it's a very much a constructed and staged scene, and we're almost kind of visually pulling back. And the next thing that we see, there's one other wee thing, I suppose, that we're told that there's these the light glowed in the room from golden balls hanging in a mobile suspenser field. So that tells us that there's a little bit of a commonality to the technology that this, whatever these suspenser fields are. And of course, if we've looked them up in the back of the book at some point, excuse me, we know a wee bit about them. There's Sootpot saying sound is good. David Segovia saying hello to everyone. So hi folks, if you're just joining us, we're just getting going on chapter 2. Just right, we're still on the first page, and I hope we're not boring you too much. As I said, we're just going to go through this with with a finely annotated tooth comb, if you like, and hopefully point out a few things and see what we find. So the next thing is we get this desk, which is I suppose we go from a globe to an ellipsoid desk. And we're told it's of jade pink petrified lacquer wood, and it stands at the center of the room. And The next thing we're told is these veriform suspensor chairs. So we've got another use for this suspensor technology. Veriform, veritas, probably. True form is the suggestion of this word, I would suggest. And we're told that two of these seats are occupied around this table. And this is where we're introduced. Rather than, as I said, we get this hand spinning, we don't quite get to see who's in charge of that globe. Rather, what we do is Frank's pulling our eye back over the room and letting us see these other two individuals to kind of fill out who's in the room. And he's going to keep the Baron mostly in shadow. So this is where we meet these two individuals. And of course, I think this is a wonderful scene, by the way. We've had a pretty good, really good introduction to the Atreides, Castle Caladan, the mystery, the intrigue surrounding this young man. And here we've skipped somewhere else here. Here's a different group of individuals, and we're going to find them, pretty much quite villainous in their minds. And we're going to get a good introduction to them. And I think an awful lot of this, as I suppose we look at the recent film, it's not there, and we really don't get to see. I think we haven't seen Feyd-Rautha, who's right there at the beginning, and we get the real sense of Piter, I think, and there's a real sense of nuttiness about Piter, and that he's a psychopath probably. And the way these three characters, I suppose we're almost going to look at, in a sense, we almost look at Piter and the Baron's relationship through Feyd's idea, through Feyd's viewpoint. Sorry, and Feyd's kind of just been invited into this for the first time, and they're not named at this point, but we get descriptions of them. So one of these individuals is a youth, and the other is a man. And with the first individual, we're told that he's dark-haired, about 16, round of face, and has sullen eyes. And the other individual, the man, is slender, short, and effeminate. So, of course, we know they're describing Feyd and Piter, but at this point, none of these individuals are named. They'll be probably pretty sure that we're talking about the Harkonnens. And we get the point of both youth and man stared at the globe, and the man half in the shadows. So, this third individual is mysterious. We get the sense of the fat hand. It's glittered with rings. It suggests wealth. And this individual's staying in the shadow. And the first thing that we get from this individual is laughter. We get a chuckle. Excuse me. A chuckle sounded beside the globe. And a basso voice rumbled out of the chuckle. There it is, Piter, the biggest man-trap in all history, and the Duke's headed into its jaws. Is it not a magnificent thing that I, the Baron Vladimir Harkonnen, do? So here we go. This is the introduction to the Baron. I think a great literary villain, and much more than just a fat guy floating around and being villainous, I think. There's an awful lot to him. And I suppose we're going to have a wee chat about what the Baron's really like in Dune in this chapter. And I suppose there's some of those elements of his character. We've talked a wee bit throughout on the station in relation to Dune, the new movie, about how those aspects of those characters would possibly be unpalatable to a modern audience in the cinema. And I suppose it's curious to, I wonder how they are to a modern reader of science fiction. Chaya says these early scenes always felt like reading something already on film. Ironic there's yet to be a good movie that's true to the story. I love when you do a bit of character voice when you read it. Way good. Thanks, Joseph. I'll try my best, actually. I'm a wee bit bunged up tonight, guys. And as I said, the problem for me, I think most of you who know me from the beginning of the channel know that I have a funny hearing problem, and it's all I'm not deaf in the conventional sense. I suppose sometimes I hear just fine, but it's a pressure thing. So I have a lot of negative pressure in my head, and I generally blow air out of my eyes to relieve it, which I'm not going to do on screen because it's a bit freaky. It's a bit freaky for me as well, actually. So I'm just sounding really underwater tonight. I hope I don't sound too bad. But as I say, whenever I'm like this with my students, I have to tell them that they're to tell me if to use my indoor voice. But at the minute, I cannot tell how loud I am. Unfortunately, it's one of those things. So I hope I'm not shouting or anything. I've got the wee green dots on the microphone down below to kind of give me a bit of a guide. I imagine they'd spike if I'm absolutely screaming my head off. But sometimes, particularly if I'm feeling a bit animated, I just can't tell. But thank you guys. Yeah, absolutely. Chaya, it's like setting a scene where it really is painting a picture here. I suppose one wee thing I've left out, actually, just pointing out, we talked about the light here, the color gold, golden balls in the mobile dispenser fits. So the colors and association that we're going to get associated with these guys, colors of wealth. And if we do a wee bit of looking into for example, the Alaka wood, and we're going to come to that in a wee bit, we'll find out that that's there's an association with slavery, and that the table itself, and with also the globe itself, as we look at it, should be considered opulent, and that it's also we'll get there in a wee second. But we get it suddenly. All this different. Here's the Baron. He chuckles. So the first thing we get about him is laughter, and that could be that kind of what we like to. I think a spate of booming guffaws that a villain typically gives. So maniacal. Not that it's maniacal here, I think, but maniacal laughter is very much a stereotype of the monologuing villain, if you like. But we get this chuckle, laughter, and then this deep bass voice, and we understand that whoever he's talking to, it's the person that whoever is called Piter. There it is, Piter. And the next, and I said, this is how we're introduced to him. We're getting he talks about the biggest man trap in all of history. He's going to have the Duke's head into its jaws, and that it will be magnificent. So straight off, and of course, not only that, it's the Baron himself who introduces himself. And I think that's a particular nod to his ego and the power of his own mind, I think. As a character, I think the Baron's an absolutely brilliant literary villain. And any faults aside, I think no, I just accept the character for the way he's been written, and I think he's a great villain because of that. And I think when you remove aspects of his character, you diminish him quite badly. He is larger than life, so large that, as we'll find out, he needs a wee belt to carry him around. But these terms are hyperbolic. It's the biggest man trap in all of history. It's not just any trap. We get a sense of the magnitude and grandeur of the Baron as well, I suppose, in a wee bit. But he introduces him. Is it not a magnificent thing that I, the Baron Vladimir Harkonnen, do? So the whole kind of thing, I suppose, that's interesting about it is that he starts off referring to himself in the first person, then refers to himself in the third person, and kind of introduces himself, which should make us pay attention to this guy. And I think the interactions that we're going to find between him and Piter there's a particular antagonism between the two, and they're almost like the odd couple, that kind of thing. There's real viciousness and intellect at work between the both of them, and particularly I think the best little moments in this chapter where one of them's just staring at the other quietly, just I will have you strangled, this kind of thing. And they're a wonderful pair, I think, Piter and the Baron. And yeah, they're kind of almost opposites in some ways as well. Piter is slender and short, with an effeminate face. The Baron is this huge, massive, 200-kilo man. And as I said, we'll see some of the aspects of his character as we go here. But it's interesting, I think, how we first meet him, and how he introduces himself. And of course, if we take a wee bit about I suppose, almost every name, and we're going to get to this in a wee bit, is suggestive. within the Dune universe. Almost every planet, almost all the names in some way are suggestive or associative with some kind of meaning or some kind of myth or story. Excuse me, or cultural reference, I suppose. Um, so, first of all, the Baron, this feudal rank, if you like, and I don't know that if you think back in maybe in a post-war environment, I'd argue probably the most famous Baron's probably the Red Baron. You know, this kind of fighter pilot, this from World War, was it, I don't know, Red Baron by World War One, wouldn't he? I think, might be wrong, but that kind of it's that and it's barony is almost an associative term with villainy in that way. Vladimir, of course, is associated with Vlad Tep. Is it Vlad Tepes the third? I must get my PhD up in the background as well, by the way, folks, just so that I can quickly reference all this stuff and easily find it. Bear with me a wee second just to double check that. Let's see. Find me Vlad. Bear with me a wee second. Yeah, so let me just check that reference. Yeah, it's very much the suggestive of Vlad the Impaler. I think it's Vlad Tepes the third, and that, of course, immediately suggests Vlad Dracula, I suppose. And we're told by Herbert in Dune that Harkonnen denotes ancient heritage that has genetic lines tracing far away into the dawn times of Greek and Pathan and Mameluke, shadows of ancient history that few outside of professional historians or those trained by the Bene Gesserit could even name. Now, you'd be hard put, by the way, folks, to connect the Harkonnens to those groups. The name Harkonnen to the Greeks, the Pathans, or the Mamelukes, I think. But they're suggestive, not necessarily in that term of the Greeks, but the other two, I think, are suggestive of cultures of mercenary soldiers, that kind of thing. And bear with me, I suppose. Pathans. Historically known as Afghans, are Iranian ethnic group native to Central and South Asia. There we go. I suppose that's a modern name. Mamelukes, I think, are more of a... Bear with me a wee second, folks. Yeah, the Mamluk, there we are. One who is owned, meaning slave, and that's from Arabic Romanized, let's see. Also transliterated as Mameluk, etc., is a term most commonly referred to non-Arab ethnically diverse. And it says mostly Turkic, Caucasian, Eastern and Southeastern European slave soldiers and freed slaves to which were assigned military and administrative duties serving the ruling Arab dynasties in the Muslim world. There we go. You can have a wee look at those things on Wikipedia, folks. They're quite interesting. But in terms of Frank's research, if the Harkonnen's a Finnish name, I think, I don't know, it would be a hard press to connect those. And I think, it's the suggestion there is like a number of things with Frank is that as much as there's a historical representation of something in this universe, it's so far in the future that often the things that the names and terms and ideas, and particularly even things like the religions, have changed, and their morphology has changed in some way. And in particular, we were having a wee mention about the OC Bible the other day, and we just kind of skirted briefly about what it was, and we talked a wee bit about it in terms of the context of Orange Protestantism and, I suppose, the Green Catholic idea within Ireland. But we're going to have a look at the Orange Catholic Bible in a lot more detail, because it really is a blending of lots and lots of different religions, I suppose. And it's what aspects of these religions survive to this point. So it's the same with a lot of these things, that the idea is that there's been distortion and potentially distortion of knowledge over time. So I'll just catch up with you guys. Brad says it may be a good way to get his name, but does anyone talk like that? I've never declared I, Brad Rose, just an observation. It's a very good point. It's kind of it's very much I, Ming the Merciless as well, isn't it? I think you have to be a particular type of megalomaniac to talk that way, Brad. Babs has said, "Howdy, y'all. Sorry you're late." Hi, Babs. Not to worry at all. Yeah, we're not really too far into it, Babs. We said the devil's in the detail, and we're just really introducing the Baron. So there's little aspects of his character so far, but they don't really, will not really connect them too much with villainy. I suppose the chuckle, but indeed, the BSO voice, we're not going to see him too much. We're just going to see this fat hand, and the term that that's used quite a bit with him is the fat hand. So the other thing is, I suppose, that to point out is we get the response here from this man called Piter, and we get that his voice came out tenor with a sweet musical quality. And I suppose at this point, we're only a couple of chapters in, but I just made a wee quick note here of the way the characters' voices are being described in terms of musical terminology. So we have Piter as a tenor, the Baron is basso, Jessica is a soft contralto, and we have Mohim as a wheeze and an untuned balisette. But then, of course, later on, her voice is also gentle, and her words are lit up brilliant whenever she tells the truth to Paul. So again, how he's painting his characters, and again, the idea that Herbert uses Jungian mandalas. That he talks a fair bit about how his writing process, whether all of it's to be believed or not, is unsure. But he would talk about writing in haiku and then using mandalas to create pairings and shadings, etc., etc. But certainly, in terms of listening to Herbert's own words on this matter, we can actually see him in doing this. So the use of color within the book so far, the use of sound, particularly within terms of musical terminology. We've even heard about tones and atonal shadings and so on. So it's just a wee note, and voices being really important in this. So just after this, I suppose, we get Piter talking, assuredly, Baron. Excuse me. But once again, and this is the second time, and I've got a wee list of fat hand number 1, fat hand number 2, fat hand number 3. So this is fat hand number 2 on the globe. The fat hand descended onto the globe, stopped the spinning. All eyes in the room could focus on the motionless surface and see that it was the kind of globe made for wealthy collectors or planetary governors of the empire. So this individual is most likely one of those two things, probably both. And as I said, what's interesting about this, and I've made a wee note here, that the Baron's hand stops, okay, and the author is directing us, and as we said, there's something Chaya said earlier. The early scenes, they felt like reading something already on film. And if you imagine that this globe stops, this hand stops the globe, you can imagine the camera maybe pulling back to see, who is this individual, but it doesn't. And the narrator in this case is our viewpoint. So rather than let's see the Baron, he doesn't. And the narrator goes to all eyes in the room would focus on the motionless surface of this globe. And so we too focus on this planet. And as I said, we're told it's a sort of globe, there's wealth in it again, to match the opulence of the table. And remember, this room's full of information as well. So what we're told about it is that's made for wealthy collectors or planetary governors of the empire, has the stamp of imperial handicraft about it. And then we're told that the latitude and longitude lines, are inlaid with hair-fine platinum wire. So platinum, really expensive metal. The polar caps were inserts of finest cloud milk diamonds. So we have platinum and diamonds. And okay, let's go on at the top of those metals and diamonds, real wealth just for a globe. And then, of course, we get the fat hand again. This is the third time. The fat hand moved, tracing details on the surface. So like the other two occupants, all eyes in the room can focus on this motionless surface and see it as the kind of globe made for the wealthy, etc. But we're focusing on it too. And of course, we do have this map of Arrakis at the front of the book. And this fat hand moves, tracing the details on the surface. And we're about to get a wee bit of a lesson here. So this is the Baron's first lesson. And he tells them, I invite you to observe the reiteration of the basso voice rumble. Observe closely, Peter, and you too, Feyd-Rautha, my darling. And then, so we get the other individual here now, the youth that is mentioned earlier, this dark-haired, about 16, round of face, sullen-eyed, is Feyd-Rautha. And the language from the Baron as well is my darling. Sorry, my Irish lilt probably made that sound a bit different than it should have been, but it's almost like a kind of, again, you think about Gollum and Lord of the Rings, my precious, that kind of, there's and we'll see, by the way, we're going to show you what kind of words the Baron uses quite subtly, the words around him as we go. So we're told to observe, and it's again, this should reiterate the Reverend Gaius Helmoheim observation and crisis in the previous chapter. This is observation, and we're getting a lesson as well, in the same way that the lessons that we learn in the first chapter for Paul are taught to us through his tutors, through him as he recalls his lessons. Here's the Baron giving us one. And I'll just catch up. Lord Crunk says, hello. Hi, Lord Crunk. Super, to give it a tone of proclamation, perhaps, which is the higher rank, Duke or Baron. Is there anything made of the difference in the book? A Duke's a higher rank than a Baron. So within the UK royalty, anyway. Dukedoms, baronets, that I suppose. Yeah. So I suppose within the Queen, then immediately you get the prince and princesses, etc. But I suppose his Royal Highness, the Duke of, etc., the Duke of Kent, that kind of thing, that's kind of the secondary rank, is immediately below Prince, I would argue. Barons are a little bit further down. But again, the suggestion of medieval ranks, etc. There's quite a few different ranks, so those are more European ones, I would argue. But yeah, and he is the Baron, isn't he, really? Imagine there must be plenty of barons about. But yeah, enigmatic way to introduce him. And he is an enigmatic character, I suppose. He's larger than life. So we're told to observe closely. And so we should do, shouldn't we? Let's see what he has to say. First of all, it's a bit of a geography lesson, by the way, I suppose. Observe closely, Peter, and you too, Feyd-Rautha, my darling, from 60 degrees north to 70 degrees south. These exquisite ripples. And so we're looking at this globe. Their colouring. Does it not remind you of sweet caramels? And these lovely polar caps, so small. Could anyone mistake this place? And that question itself is quite interesting. Could anyone mistake this place? This is the first of these type of rhetorical questions that the Baron will use. Arrakis. Aha, so that's what the planet is. And it's truly, truly unique. A superb setting for a unique victory. So this information that we're getting, and of course the colouring of the map of the globe, and I think that there must be something interesting about this globe, of course, because if you think about in terms of Herbert's work and the idea of general semantics being about at the time, I suppose one of the ideas from general semantics that you could argue is quite important in Dune is this concept that the map is not the territory. In other words, if you have a map of a place, that's just a map of it. Even if you're standing in the middle of it, it's no real representation of what it's like to walk through that territory. It's a bit like the difference, I suppose, between how the crow flies and how the wolf runs, as they say. Just to point out, by the way, in terms of the Baron golden sweet caramels, sweets, candy, terms associated with children, toys, etc. We're going to see this as we go through. Because of his character, there's certain words that are used in association with him. So the caramels. This is the area on the globe that is obviously for spice mining, etc. As we'll find out, and of course points out nowhere do you see blue or lakes. No, there's no lakes, no rivers, no seas on this planet. So we're learning a little bit about Arrakis. And of course, this rhetorical question, could anyone mistake this place? So this is going to be, again, lessons put onto us. We will not mistake this planet again if we see it with the small polar caps in this region and between 60 degrees north and 70 degrees south. This planet is unique and it's special. And of course, we know that this is the planet that Paul Atreides is going to go to. And it's interesting that the planet's spinning. And of course, the name Arrakis, meaning like dancer to spin. And of course, we're told that the planet's truly unique and it's going to create a unique victory for the Baron. And it's a superb setting for this unique victory. And of course, it's the superb setting in a bit of a for Dune, the story that we're actually reading. So it works on a few different levels, I think. But the language is important. Let me see, just to back up a wee bit, folks, catch up with your comments so I don't lose track. I doubt the Emperor follows a single period system given there's so many cultures within it. Yeah. And China says the Emperor needs to approve. Sorry, Empire, not Emperor. Yeah, the Baron's house fell but was revived, whereas the Atreides always stood, could be denoted by rank. The Baron is new money. I'd assume Baron Harkonnen took out his higher ranking family in order to obtain his title. Maybe the prequels go into it. And regarding the globe, I think it's only a prop to help represent the Baron's hand in coming events. Absolutely. But I suppose we're learning a bit about different planets as we go. And we've had a wee bit about, and oddly enough, funny enough, I've kept this for the next chapter because we're going to go back to Caladan, but we didn't discuss the nature of the planet Caladan too much last time. Though we did have a good natter about Arrakis and the meaning behind the words and the real constellations and so on. We're going to have a wee look at Gidi Prime as well. But yeah, it absolutely, I mean, titles, that's all they are, actually, to be honest. It's just I call you this, and it gives you, usually it means lands and title, and it allows you to tax, etc., that kind of thing. But if you look at the royal family's ranks in the United Kingdom, and I suppose the one that you'll see at the minute in the news is Prince Andrew, who is a prince, but I don't know what they call him. He's the Royal Highness the Duke of York. There you go. And of course, with all the nonsense that he's involved in at the minute, they've stripped him of all his, I think all his titles pretty much. Preemptive move by the royal family. He's allowed to call himself His Royal Highness, the HRH, but he's not using that title. But yeah, he would be a duke. And if you think in terms of before Prince Charles had any children, if you like, then the line to the throne is that, so there's the Queen, then it'll be Prince Charles, and before he had any, then Prince Andrew would have been second in line to the throne. So the Prince of Wales is the main title for the heir to the throne in the UK. Usually the secondary title there is probably the Duke of York. But I'm not too sure about I don't really follow the royal family in any way whatsoever. Though my dad used to protect most of them whenever they came to Northern Ireland. So there you go. But yeah, I suppose you probably find there is. Oh, I suppose there's all sorts of there's books on peerages and the peerage system. And in the UK in particular, you can give somebody, make them a baron and send them to the House of Lords, etc. This kind of thing. It's a means of preventing them, I think, serving in the House of Commons. So it's a good way of getting some people out of the way so that they can't be Prime Minister again, this kind of thing. As far as I understand, I might be wrong about that. And the United Kingdom still has life peerages, I suppose, which you could argue is it's a part of a feudal system, which means if Baron so-and-so dies, then that title passes on. to their child, I suppose, and then that can carry a pension actually, if it's a seat in the House of Lords, I suppose, then they've kind of got a job where they can go and have political power and get money for it on a person, like that kind of thing. So it's still believe it or not, a thing in the United Kingdom, and that's our honours list. If you look at our actors and so on and so forth, if you have Sir Patrick Stewart, for example, from Star Trek, he's a Sir. What does that mean? It means he's a knight of the British Empire. That pretty much is what that title is. And so on and so forth, Sorry, getting a wee bit into the title thing there. Excuse me. But yeah, the globe is very much, it's a thing to focus us on and educate us with at this point via the Baron and this lesson that he's given. But also, because of that, we don't. It's a way of sort of keeping the Baron hidden, I suppose. So it's a distraction. The globe, I think, in a sense, for the reader, because it kind of makes you want to know more about him, and it's building mystery, building intrigue. And could anyone mistake this place? By the way, as we go, eventually, of course, we should know that it should be pretty hard to mistake Arrakis after a while. And of course, this is the setting for our action, of course. So we get a wee bit of Piter here next. And a smile touched Piter's lips. And to think, Baron, the Padishah Emperor believes he's given the Duke your spice planet. How poignant. And if we read a little bit more about this, we get a response from the Baron, who rumbles, by the way. His deep bass is always rumbling. And you're talking nonsense, Piter, basically. And what this is a little bit of an attempted intrigue where it's not required, I suppose. The Baron says this is a nonsensical statement, and you say this to confuse young Feyd-Rautha, but it's not necessary to confuse my nephew. So a little bit of information that Feyd is the Baron's nephew, so they're family. And we wonder about this. Why is this guy talking nonsense to this youth? What's the point of that? And even the Baron's pointing this out to us. You're talking nonsense, Peter. And I suppose this gives us a little bit more about what's going on. We get a little bit more description of Feyd at this point, who's, again, we get the reinforcement, pardon me, that he's sullen-faced again, and he's wearing a black leotard. Now, whether that's for style, fashion, sport, etc., who knows? So they're interrupted, and we kind of, what's he doing here? He says this to confuse the young nephew, and then we get a bit of kind of old-fashioned secret intrigue. There's knocking at, and I think this is quite interesting the way Herbert puts it. There's a discreet tapping sounded at the door in the wall behind them. So almost the door in the wall. You get a sense almost that it's disguised, I thought, because of all the books and films and stuff, that they're in that kind of secret room. And Piter unfolds from his chair, crosses the door, cracked it wide enough to accept a message cylinder, closes the door, etc. And he scans this thing, and then another chuckle. And this is the message, and we get Piter delivering this message. And also, just to point out, Piter chuckling, the Baron chuckling, it's kind of this imitation, if you like, of character. Almost a mimesis, I think. So this message, and it comes, and the intrigue continues, and we get a few interesting terms. We get a chuckle from Piter, but not one chuckle, another chuckle as well. So he does what the Baron does, and then does a little bit more, if you see what I mean. He's kind of exaggerating that. And the first thing we get is the fool answered. And of course, just going to point out that the fool is one of these Jungian archetypes. And we're going to get a whole bunch of people referred to as fools in this chapter, and we could arguably say that they all are fools in some way. So who are they referring to? Of course, whenever did an Atreides. So Well, the Baron demanded. The fool answered his Baron. Whenever did an Atreides refuse the opportunity for a gesture? The Baron asked. That tells us something. And we're going to find out a wee bit as we go here as well, that it seems that the Harkonnens know their enemy very, very well. So we have Leto, the Duke of the House Atreides, being described as a fool. And we also understand that he never refuses. When did an Atreides refuse the opportunity for a gesture? And the interesting thing about this, as we go, so we're actually learning a little bit about Leto here. And we learn quite a lot about the Atreides from the Harkonnens. And as we were told in the little epigraph at the start, to understand Muad'Dib is to understand the Harkonnens, to understand light to darkness, this kind of thing. They're opposites in some ways, but they're very much, I think, two sides of the same coin. Let me just catch up with your comments, folks, before they run off the screen. The Gom Jabbar test focused on the mere fact of a trap and what the trap being will do. The Baron emphasizes the context of the the type of trap, as well as the intended victim. Yeah, we're really getting a good deconstruction of it here. Moo the Dog Zero says, this seems interesting. Moo the Dog Zero says, what is? I'm not too sure. Thanks for joining us, Moo the Dog. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. Brad saying that's why Winston Churchill refused the title originally. If his children inherit it, it would interfere with their political ambitions in the House of Commons. His kid did inherit it, didn't? As far as I know, Winston Churchill is a serving, if I'm not mistaken, Brad is a serving peer in the House of Lords, and that would be I might be mistaken, but I think it's his grandson, possibly. China says, interesting contrast between Paul and Feyd too. Paul is sly, yet the focus of chapter 1, all from his perspective. Feyd is petulant, just getting clued into the plan. Yes, we're going to talk about that as much as we'll see this contrast. And it's Paul, I think we were talking about the thing that kept being emphasized about Paul in chapter 1 was he's cautious. And we even get a wee bit of discussion. The Reverend Mother goes, oh, he's cautious. Yes. And Jessica's saying, yes, because he's been trained, as he should be, because he's been trained that way. So everything about Paul suggests caution. He's slack, cunning, intellect. But this youth so far seems to be a bit, it's a bit teenagery, I suppose. And we're going to find out a wee bit more about him. But yes, indeed, the main characteristic of Feyd here is impatience. And we probably in that case, we might wonder, how would Feyd do with the box? Would he just take it out? I can't be, too late. Would he have the ability to keep his hand in the box? Is an interesting thing. So we do have, and I just wanted to point this out, as I said, we've got Leto being pointed out as being a fool here. But we're going to have a number of people being pointed out. Most of them in this room are going to be pointed out to be fools, I think, at some point. And so Peter takes the message, he's reading it, and said he's chuckling away. And we learn a little bit of things about the Atreides. And of course, we also learn here that there's excitement within the Harkonnens. They want to know what's going on. So we get told that it's a response, first of all, that this letter is a response to something we can't see, and that it's happened outside of the action that we're getting to be let in on in the book, in the events of the story. So this is something that's prologue. It's happened before we've seen this. And it's a bit, I suppose, something interesting that we pointed out last time, folks, was that the litany against fear isn't the litany against fear. It's the response to the litany against fear. And what the actual litany is, we don't know. And in this sense, we've got the response to the Baron's peace process, whatever letter he sent. But again, we don't get to see that. We don't get the actual words. And it kind of almost presents the Harkonnen, we've tried to make peace. almost in a good light, but of course we'll learn very quickly that that's not the case, that this is all a pretense. And we get a little bit of language in here, as I said, coming from Peiter. And he says, he's most uncouth, Baron. He addresses you as Harkonnen. No sire no sire is cher cousin. No title, nothing. So that's a little bit of French, no sir and dear cousin, for example. So we get another language, a little bit of French, and we get a little bit of French here and there from Peiter. So they consider it most uncouth, that there's no titles, no nothing for the Baron here. It's meant to be insulting. And of course we get the Baron growling at this. It's a good name, and which shows he's probably prickly about his heritage. And as we were saying, we were having a discussion there, probably that the Barons, possibly they've come to their title through money, etc. Moneyed gentry. But of course, we're told his voice betrays his impatience, and another. This is not just Feyd who's impatient. The Baron's impatient. Hello, Noodles. Excuse me, my doggies have just come in. You behaving, girls? Oh, you're gorgeous. Welcome to the doghouse, folks. So, and this is where we start to move a little bit within this, and so they're quite keen to get this letter, and we're told that your offer of a meeting is refused. This is what Leto has to say. I have oft times. So just briefly, the offer of a meeting by the Baron has been refused by Leto. So that olive branch, if you like, has been turned away. That Leto often met the Baron's treachery. So Leto sees the Baron as both treacherous, and then he uses kind of absolute. All men know this. And of course, this is the Baron. We're told that he doesn't. The Baron understands that Leto loves a gesture. This is something that they've probably published publicly, and that the Atreides would use this as propaganda. All men know this is an absolute, which, as I always point out, suggests bad thinking. If you think in absolutes, what's the old joke? Is it death to all people who generalize? that kind of thing, if you see what I mean. But it's definitely a hint of propaganda from Leto. And of course, we get the next bit of it. The Art of Canley still has admirers in the Empire, and he signs it Duke Leto of Arrakis. That's my dog going squeaky squeaky with his toys. I do apologize. And Peiter begins to laugh at this, of Arrakis. Oh my, this is almost too rich. So we've got quite a wee bit of information there, folks. And the first one of these, I suppose, is the Art of Canley. And we go, I wonder what this is. The Art of Canley, and it still has admirers in the Empire. So it suggests that there's something old-fashioned about it. And if we do a wee bit of work on it, Canley is the adjective of the Turkish word can, which means blood. So in other words, Canley, as an adjective, it means bloody. It's the art of blood. There's something suggestive of violence about it. And of course, Leto has signed this, Duke Leto of Arrakis. So he's brought in, and of course, we're understanding this globe that we're looking at. And we get Peiter laughing again. So there's a third little set of laughter, and he uses the term too rich. And he uses this word again, rich. In terms of, I think maybe is the Baron, but we get this term rich in tradition as well in a minute or two. So we have this interesting thing, the Art of Canley, and of course we have a little bit about it in the I hope we do. Let's have a wee look.